Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this new series of webinars all about the value and benefits from asset management. My name is Peter Kohler. I'll introduce the team to you shortly. I'm talking from Sydney, Australia. We have a team that represents people from the Asset Leadership Network, as you can see on the screen, and from the Asset Management Council. The whole objective of these series of webinars, of which this is the first, you can see on the screen there, is to support people and their organizations start and complete their asset management journey. The whole program is aimed at collecting stories of successful asset management implementations and building a database of stories for review, education and learning. A number of us have been involved in these sorts of activities in the past, particularly the Asset Management Council, and these stories actually do represent quite a database of things that work and things that don't work. So our aim very much is to not just share the individual stories of success, but also distill those into salient points at some time in the future. The team that's facilitating this presentation today is made up of people from Australia and the Asset Leadership Network in the United States. You can see the people on the screen. I'll introduce Mike to you very shortly. Sally Nugent from Australia, some of you probably know already. And of course, myself from the Asset Management Council. The Asset Management Council and the Asset Leadership Network are very keen on this series of webinars, and for the reasons you can see on the screen, particularly from Jim Dieter, the CEO of the Asset Leadership Network. It's about hearing the stories, hearing the passion from people, learning from that. And supporting the industry general, people in the industry general, the asset management industry, to be successful. There's a couple of presentations today, two key presentations today. You can see on the screen there we have, as is usual in this series going forward, we plan to have one speaker from the United States and one speaker from Australia. And you can see on the screen here we have Art Kirtland from the US based in Texas, as you can see, and Peter Robinson from Australia, talking about their respective journeys in their respective organisations. To introduce Art to you, I'll ask Mike Bordenaro from the Asset Leadership Network introduce Art to you. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Peter, and I want to say what a privilege it has been working with Peter and Sally. They are expert in asset management and they're very good at organizing events. I've learned a lot working with them. And it's also been my privilege as Director of Communications for the Asset Leadership Network to be working with Art Kirtland for this year. Art's an ALNC Senior Fellow, and he's Director of Capital and Asset Management at University Health in San Antonio, Texas. And he ushered the hospital through the first implementation of ISO55001 certification, and he reformed the asset management department. It's quite an astonishing achievement, what you'll be seeing. But it's also been my privilege because I'm helping Art with his book, Herding Cats, and helping him develop a web course that will be offered later in this year to give people more detail. So Art, you can take over and turn on your camera and start your presentation. I have had the privilege of doing a dry run with Art, and it's really good. So take it away, Art.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for that introduction. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, just a little bit about University Health. We're one of the largest employers in the San Antonio metropolitan area with over 1,900 physicians and operating budget over $2 billion. Our strategic vision, becoming the premier healthcare system really in the nation. And what we do here in our asset management department is we support this effort. We have the main hospital campus, and we have clinics throughout the county, as well as a business center, a data center, call center. It's a huge operation. And so the beginning of our journey really began in 2013 when I joined University Health. I was in the utility industry beforehand and was somewhat familiar with ISO 55001 when it was in its draft form. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to implement a lot of the ISO 55000 ideas, and it turned out to be the case. For those of you who are in asset management, all of us, probably the first thing that might come to your head is the building and the plant assets that run the building, the chillers, the boilers, the generators, and things of that nature. But our focus in the asset management department here really is on the personal property, and so that's all the stuff inside the building, the medical equipment, the computer equipment, furniture, fixtures, things of that nature. And when I first got here, the asset management department fell under materials management, but after talking with leadership and convincing them that asset management really wasn't materials management, we got that corrected, and currently the department falls under the finance department. And so these are some of the things that probably people recognize in the operating room, and we have robotic systems as well that help deliver and transport supplies throughout the hospital. And so again, we support all the clinical staff and other support departments. We're sort of become the go-to department for people's issues with all the personal property. That was one of the efficiencies that we created right off the bat, because early on, when someone had a concern with a personal property item, sometimes they didn't know who to call, and they would call, for example, if it was a piece of medical equipment, they might call Biomed, and then Biomed might tell them to call IT because it fell under the IT department. And then within IT, as you may know, there's lots of departments like infrastructure and help, the service desk. And so the end user was calling around and around and around, and, it was really inefficient. So now they just call us and we take care of their problem for them, so they can focus on what it is that they do. Backstory too, when I first came, the asset management department was housed in one of these clinics that I was telling you about in Canada, the main office. And I used to come to the hospital like once a week and walk in through the dock area, and I would notice that the dock would have, and I'm just going to call it stuff, the personal property. It has stuff there at the dock, and coming the next week, there'd be more stuff. And then week after week, the stuff would just be accumulating until the point where it was really a hazard and a congestion and impeding on the operations of the logistics department. And then I'd come in one day and all that stuff would be gone. And it dawned on me that there was a better way to do things. And so that was our initial objective, was to make sure that that dock area was clean and people knew what to do with items that they didn't want anymore. and how to dispose of things properly. And so our initial certification, when we went through the process of being ISO certified, was just that acquisition process to make sure things that were coming in the hospital were accounted for. We kind of looked at it kind of like a house. So we wanted to make sure the front door was secure and the back door was secure. And then we decided that we would take care of the movement within the house later. So that was a priority, was just securing the front door and the back door. And so our certification began with the management of assets acquisition and delivery to make sure that those assets got to the departments that ordered the items, and then finally that our disposal process to make sure that we disposed of things correctly. And then we went on to recertify once those were down to the other life cycle phases. So these are the life cycle phases that we created as a department. And you'll may or may not notice that maintenance is missing from this life cycle. And that's because the maintenance is handled based on the asset class. So for example, medical equipment, the maintenance is handled by the biomedical department. The IT, it's handled by IT equipment. The facilities department handles the maintenance of the facilities, the plant assets that I talked about earlier. And so some of the challenges that we faced are probably similar to what other organizations face, in that there's not enough training about asset management departments. They tend to work in silos. They don't have the proper tools in place to handle the tracking or management of their property. So yeah, for example, being the first hospital to certify under ISO, we really had no guidance, nowhere to turn to look for examples. So when we created our strategic asset management plan, we were really not sure of what we were doing. And to give you an example of the evolution of our strategic asset management plan, initially it was a 2-page document that we sent to our certification body, and they told us that it was completely inadequate. And we went back and forth with the SAMP until finally, after I think it was 7 tries, 7 tries. It ended up to be a 30-page document before the certification body accepted it as a valid strategic asset management plan. And so overcoming the challenges here at the hospital really wasn't too difficult because the employees are familiar with certification. There's a lot of certification that has to happen in a hospital. And so when we mentioned that we were looking to become certified, people just instinctively knew that this was a big deal, and it would take the cooperation of the entire health system to accomplish it. And our leadership is forward thinking, and they like to when they heard that we hadn't had an ISO certification before, so when they heard that we were doing this, they were very excited and supported us in our efforts. And then with organizations like the Asset Management Council and Asset Leadership Network, is an excellent resource for me and my staff to turn to keep up with what's going on in the world of asset management. And then ISO and the National Property Management Organization provides the needed training as well. And so just some of the things that we've been able to accomplish, I won't go through them all, but just one of the things that I'm really proud about it is that we introduced an asset management advocate program. At University Health, we have over 300 departments. And so this advocate program keeps us in touch with all 300 plus departments. We communicate with them every month. And it's sort of similar to like the safety advocate program that a lot of organizations have. When the fire alarm goes off for a drill, you have people to direct employees to a certain spot. And so it's kind of based on that safety program. It's the asset management advocate program. And we use it sort of like a catch-all to make sure all of our processes and procedures are working properly. What we do is send our advocates a monthly survey with specific questions that have to do with our processes. For example, did you receive any assets that weren't tagged properly? And so what they do is take these questions to their staff, their employees who meet frequently, and so they ask these questions, and the questions are answered sort of collectively, so that everyone becomes eyes and ears of the organization, and that's kept asset management really in the forefront of people's minds instead of the back of people's minds, because with personal property, people they come into work, they have a desk, their computer. They don't really think about, what it took to get those things into place, especially on an individual level. But, collectively, it's a really big deal. You might have a building that'll last you, 40, 50 years, and the stuff inside of it might turn over anywhere from 5 to 15 times within that time frame. So eventually, all that personal property may end up being a higher cost than the building itself. So it's really important to manage all of those things. And we report our metrics to senior leadership every month. One of the critical things that we do is we save our clinical staff time from dealing with personal property issues. They can focus on the patients, and that's really the goal. We've been able to increase our revenue from auctioning our unneeded assets up to the tune of almost $250,000 a year. We reutilize assets when we can. That's the first thing we try to do before we auction it. We try to reutilize. We've been very successful at that, and saved over, again, another $250,000 on average per year. We want to be good environmental students, or stewards, and so we try to ensure none of our stuff ends up in a landfill. And so we have electronics recycling, and we report that to the state of Texas. Space is a premium at a hospital. It's very limited. A lot of times departments will pay for off-site storage, and then these things, out of sight, out of mind, and they end up in storage for years, and the people that initially wanted to store things end up leaving the organization, and it's there for a long time, and month after month the organization just pays the storage bill. And so we've kind of had some focus put on that, and so we don't want our assets to remain idle. We want them to be used for the way they were intended to be used, or we auction them, or we recycle them. And again, we have over 300 departments in the University Health, and we try to keep everyone engaged the other benefit that happened is too, like I said earlier, how employees have to call around from department to department sometimes to get help, and they no longer have to do that. So employee satisfaction, we've noticed, has increased as well. And so if I could pass anything along, it would really be to be patient and be persistent and learn to negotiate. So for example, part of our inventory process, what happens on the floors is when a patient leaves, the soiled equipment gets put into a soiled utility room, and materials management will pick that up daily and take it to biomed to be decontaminated. And so I thought it was a good idea that we could inventory all that equipment in one spot after it gets decontaminated and before it goes out to be reutilized. And I approached the director of materials management on this idea, and he thought it was a great idea, and it would be information that he could use as well to know, to keep track of the rate of equipment being reutilized, and he can attribute that to his staff and use it as a metric. And so when we talked to the staff level about doing that, there was some objection because not all of that equipment goes out on a daily basis, and they were concerned that they were going to be inventorying the same thing day after day after day before it goes out. And so we asked for a recommendation on what they would do, and it turned out to be a good one, that the inventory should take place in the decontamination room itself. And so we implemented that, and it worked out beautifully. Anytime an item goes into the decontamination room, it gets inventoried, our records get inventoried. And so it wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but I got the same result. And so I would say, be flexible, and the ends don't always justify the means, as long as you get the information that you need, and people and everyone's happy, it's a win-win. I would look for those opportunities. And so, Mike?
Well, thank you very much, Art. We'll be taking questions after Peter speaks, but just want to mention again that Art is the author of Herding Cats, Applied Personal Property Asset Management Principles for Hospitals. And if you want to learn about that book in the course in the fall, you can email info@assetleadership.net. And now we will turn over to Peter Kohler. Peter Robinson, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right. Good morning or good afternoon where you are in the world. Thanks, Art, for your presentation just before. Really informative. And thanks today to Peter Kohler and Sally Nugent for an opportunity to present. What I'm going to share on today is more a philosophy of asset management against ISO 55001 and how I engaged in part of the journey as a participant with an organization called Caltex. So let me go through and share a bit about what this journey looked like with Caltex. So what we're going to look at is how some of the ISO 55001 aspects and elements were contrasted in Caltex's journey. So Caltex Australia, which is now Ampol, as part of their adaptability, they've changed the name. They're a fuels industry which is Australia-wide, but now they actually are branching out to further regions. So in their organization, they were undergoing rapid change in that industry. Stakeholders' needs were changing. Caltex needed to respond to these changes. So they started to develop a culture of adaptability to respond. They saw the context, what was occurring, the stakeholders' needs. Then they looked at the leadership and strategy required to respond. So a little bit of background about the organisation. The former Caltex CEO, Julian Segal, kicked off this entire adaptability program to get the company into a better shape. He looked at the Kernel refinery and made the hard decision that it had to stop. So by 2014, the refinery became a terminal. Likewise, their other refinery, which is still operating today, Lytton, they needed to make it more efficient. So they did a lot of work in there to bring it to the efficiency levels. And then overall, their fuel market volume was dropping at 2% a year. So you've got to make the same amount of money with less amount of revenue coming through or product. Likewise, they looked at a new program called Tabula Rasa, which means clean slate, and which meant they needed to look at 10 to 12% staff reductions as part of that program, as part of the efficiencies. And what they were trying to push for was a sounder financial footing to enable future investment, because they looked at the share price was moving a bit too fluctuating too much, and they wanted to have a more consistent, stabilized share pricing as well. So the solution that they came up with was more for like initially was a 5 or 6 year roadmap. It's now then adapted to its next generation, and also culture of adaptability, where it first started with leadership and strategy. That's what was the key driver for this program to make it work. The next one was to invest into the assets, the planning of what assets have you got, the configuration of your assets, of how they are going to work with each other. And then likewise, then it was then to fulfill the vision and then install that top-down leadership culture that fostered the adaptability mindset. That was an awesome thing about Caltex, where most of the people in the business really actually took pride in their business and where they worked, and they really had that culture of cooperation and teamwork, which is very evident across every department. But there was some challenges in this journey. Caltex were in a contested marketplace. They were competing against businesses and organisations which had global buying power. There were global fuel suppliers in Australia. Likewise, there was ongoing interest from other organisations to actually acquire them. So they were actually trying to fend off takeovers at the same time. Secondly, the people's roles and capabilities to make this happen also needed to transition in their skill sets, and the investments required to be applied strategically. And there was no room for failure in this. If there was failure in the strategy due to the very tight margins in the marketplace, it would be put Caltex in a very vulnerable position. So there were some key activities in their journey for adaptation or adaptability. It was first, as we talked about before, leadership and strategy. And this leadership and strategy meant they could actually start looking at new ventures for the organisation. It meant improved practices of how they operate. So my part of the role there was to look at their operational management system and actually help the actual terminals and distribution assets and fuel and aviation to look at this operational management system and look at how they can best apply it to their context and settings. And then lastly on this next bit was a refined mindset, embedded convenience thinking across the business. What they wanted to do with their retail business is that you don't go to a petrol station anymore. You now go to a convenience centre, and you get your convenience items as well as your fuel, because there is an opportunity in that marketplace. So the second area of adaptability was invest. So in their critical assets they invested in, such as the Kernel refinery, and then also their supply chain. So what they ended up doing is establishing the Singapore trading arm. The Singapore trading arm put them in a competitive spot against their global buying power, against their competition. The Kernel conversion, that became now the largest fuel terminal in the Southern Hemisphere. And as we talked about the retail area around the brands, if you've been to the service station, there is now Starmart. Well, probably not Starmart anymore. They've changed that again. And also Foodery is the other brand. So you're going to a convenience centre. That was the intent of going to this bit on the investment side. So then once we've done the investment, it was now to get the work done, fulfill the vision. As you talked about now, it was the Singapore Trading Hub was now established. Tabula Rasa change program had fulfilled its outcomes. The customer value chain optimization occurred. So we've now got fuels which have been centralized for a buying power in Singapore and now pushing through to the different regions. And the reason why they've more gone to a refinery fuels model, because when Caltex and those different fuel companies in Australia started, we had plenty of fuel supply in the Bass Strait, and it was very easy to refine really good quality oils. However, Bass Strait's depleted, so they've had to now go to more refined fuel importation model. Then you go, well, why can't we just buy some fuel from somewhere else in Australia, like Northwest? Well, they've already got preset contracts for those marketplaces, and we are still dealing with the supply chain routes on those sort of challenges as well. So the next one was capital management. As we talked about before, they started to stabilize their earnings. The graphs and their trends were very stabilized now. So in the state of when they kicked off the program, their share price was at about $17. It now stabilizes about in the mid-20s of dollars per share. And then likewise, this program allowed regional growth. They've been able to buy further organisations in Victoria, New Zealand, Gold New Zealand, Philippines was sea oil, and then likewise talking about the Singapore trading arm. Plus they're looking at, I think, a USA ventures as well to increase their volume of product revenue. Remember, we're talking about the Australian revenue was dropping 2%. They were now looking at increasing their revenue of volume into other regions. And then what also we saw here was there was adaptability, was the embedded top-down leadership culture. The CEO had an open door policy. Anyone in the business could go and see the CEO, book in once a week, within your turn, of course, and actually have a chat. And that could be anything that you wish. You could talk about sport, philosophy, the business, or whatever you want. He actually made it very clear, I want to be approachable. Likewise, about the approachability, he was engaged in the safety outcomes, where he would say, right, we've just done this safety check, and he would ring up the actual person that has closed out the action and do the V&V for him, say, are you happy with the outcome of the action? Is it working? Do I need to do anything more? Can I help you? That was part of his engagement in the business. And the organisational values were employee-derived. So they had think, win, act, trailblaze. The actual employees that took ownership of actually putting those values in place, they developed them. And likewise, the leadership in the business was visible. Quite often, the CEO and the exec team would go to sites, visit people at terminals, and actually take the time to actually show that people in their business was important to them and were important to the outcomes of the organisation. So what we could then see in here is the measurable values in the outcomes of this work. Firstly, if we look at the fundamentals and the pillars of asset management, we look at the first one of value. The share price started to outperform the actual competitors in the market, with 2018 being the pivotal year where these 2012 objectives, they were met. The achievements were published and the stakeholders were updated saying what we set out in 2012 to transform this business has occurred. Now we're looking for different ventures. So then likewise, the next piece here in the fundamentals was leadership. Is that what we talked about before around the initial strategy fully delivered in 2019. This allowed them to be in a new space as an organisation. They were positioned to create more value for their shareholders. And the good quote that came out of this, life got easier for our customers, employees, and our partners. Adaptability means life actually gets easier. It works. There's a roadmap. It achieves. Things actually start to work. You're not fighting a system. The system's now working for you. Then likewise, there's a couple more of the fundamentals or pillars of asset management. Assurance, the risk profile of the business has actually reduced. So they're not actually subject to market volatility in like products and things like that. They actually have now some other market spaces in the USA, in New Zealand, Singapore, in Philippines to hedge their volatility. And likewise, they're not running as many refineries, and the one they have is more efficient, so they don't have the risk of refinery availability in the organisation as they did previously. And lastly, the actual value chain was demonstratable. What it means is that they actually could bring product in, put it into their distribution network, and have it ready for customers. So the last one of the pillars was adaptability. Is that adaptability for for Caltex, or now Ampol, means that the organisation had greater control of their destiny to respond to operational contexts and stakeholder needs. That's what this meant. They could keep the existing refinery viable. They actually moved away from their fancy, shiny CBD offices and got out to the suburbs, and they put many more people out to their refinery site because they know we actually don't need a CBD office. It's nice, but not necessary. What also was the adaptability meant around the new ventures and new opportunities and life getting easier, they could now create, just recently, a new hydrogen fuels business unit. Also, they've been able to start investing in an EV charging network, and they could also start moving towards a carbon neutral approach to their business. What you're also noticing is that Caltex now is moving, or now Ampol, they're now no longer a petroleum company, they are now an energy company. And that was probably the key thing in this adaptability and mindset in the context and stakeholders. They've now gone from fuels to business to an energy business. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Peter, for that presentation, and also Art for the presentation prior to that. And if I can invite Art and Peter Robinson to join us as panelists, because we're going to have some questions and discussions. Now, I think we won't show the screen yet. Okay. Art, are you able to also join us, or turn your camera on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. And it's been really interesting, and it's great to be here illustrating the benefits of asset management to create wealth in organisations, and even at a country level, I think, if we get enough of this implemented. I see we've got a number of questions already in the audience, and I encourage you, if you've got questions of any of the speakers, please put it via the question panel, and we'll do our best to get to it. We've got about 20 minutes to talk about questions, so we'll see how we go. And to start it off, I've noticed quite a few of the questions are about senior leadership and their support. And Ganinda asked the first question. Sorry, I hope I've got your name correctly there. And it was basically this, for Art, the size of the savings, Art, were, according to your figures there, a little less than $1 million. And I imagine in the total budget, that was not a huge amount. Did that impact positively, negatively on convincing senior management to support the project?
I think that you're right. It's a drop in the bucket for our total budget, but remember we're in part funded by taxpayers, so every penny counts, and so what we're able to save on one end, we can use for priority projects on another. So, but I think in terms of convincing senior leadership, it wasn't really about the money. It was about being able to be more accountable and responsible, and those kinds of things. Really, I think was the part that convinced them.
And Art did not provide a dollar value for the hours saved.
Yeah, I noticed
and that was significant, and that would increase that number. But it, like Art said, it wasn't about the money. It was about improving quality service.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed that was 700 hours. I mean, that's a very huge saving of staff time going elsewhere to add value to the to the organisation. And I suppose you could monetize that in a way by saying how much more service you're able to deliver in that. Okay. Devon, who followed that, had a similar question. Whoops. Oh, dear me. I'm running out of space here to read all the questions. Okay, let me ask another question, and it's to both Peter and to Art. How well do you think you and your staff were supported by senior leadership? And I know in Peter's case, the CEO Julian Segal was the implementer of the process, but through the organisation, how well were you supported, Peter? And Art, how well do you think support went for you?
I'd say I was more of a participant in the process. However, you could see this was a top-down probably approach in leadership, which really took ahead of the leadership aspect of ISO 55000. But that was then represented in the general manager for distribution, where you just need that extra engagement or support. He was available for it. Likewise, the direct managers and different pieces where you're part of the journey in this transition adaptability. It was very clear that you could reach out when it's fair and reasonable and get the support you needed. You weren't left stranded, in the organisation.
Yeah, it wasn't too difficult either for us. I think I mentioned the hardest part really was just getting the attention of leadership, because they're very busy and all over the place. So I would just suggest having an elevator pitch ready. And so when you have those 10, 15 seconds in the elevator or in the stairwell or whatever, you can just go ahead and make your case, because that's really all you need, is just to get their attention, and then you can follow up with can we make an appointment to get together in the future.
Yeah, and probably on that point is the business or really invested in business case presentation skills, that they actually could encourage their people to pitch to their leadership in the business their ideas in a way which is compelling and convincing. So they actually wanted their people to come up with the ideas and do it well, tell them well how they actually could work for their business.
Okay, thanks for that. There's quite a few more questions, so we'll keep going. And this one from Jeffrey is an interesting one, and I imagine a number of people will ask it. How important, and it's specifically for Art, how important was ISO 55000 versus simply implementing good asset management? So, sorry, let me rephrase. How important was the certification piece versus simply using good asset management via applying 55,000?
Yeah, I think it was critical, because we really didn't know the standard as well as we thought we did. Like I mentioned, we went through 7 revisions of our strategic asset management plan. And, I've been dealing in personal property for many years. And I thought that when we had our gap analysis, we were just going to fly through this. I thought we had it down to a science. We had the internal audit, everything. And then when the auditor came here, he pointed out things that just, it just went over my head completely. But I understood what he was talking about. And so I would say that without that gap analysis, at least, you might think you're doing asset management, but there's just so many things that you could miss, because you take things for granted versus having a fresh set of eyes that come from a completely different industry looking at what you're doing. I think is really important.
Okay, and I guess Peter, because the Ampol case study comes before ISO 55000, if ISO 55000 certification had been around that day, it might have made a difference as Art has just articulated?
Yeah, it's how I looked at this was more retrospective. I was seeing the elements of 55,000 that I think more than anything is that ISO business lens, ISO standard approach of the clauses 4 to 10, which they could really adopt. And with the Caltex model, it was, again, they were highly focused on their asset integrity, basically keep the fuels in the pipes and the tanks, because when that doesn't happen, it's a bad day for everyone. And what you'll see then is what they focused on is not so much the asset strategy, but more the asset configuration being right for where they are for their context and their stakeholders.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. A question for you, Peter, from Francois. What role did strategic asset management play in the asset management drive for Ampol?
I'd say, look at this, they had more of a focus.
Sorry, so that was long-term life cycle specifically.
I'd say in the engineering space, the strategic asset management piece was all very well established. Like you had your asset criticality and integrity piece already done, that you make sure your tanks and your pipe works are all in a good condition in your terminal networks. So in strategic asset management space, not necessarily too much, because you're talking about a business that's been around 80 to 100 years, and if you hadn't got it right by now, then you're no longer in business, essentially, because few industries are in a business where your margins are tight as can be. You're turning over $12 billion worth of product for $200 to $400 million profit per year. It is tight.
Okay, this next question I'm going to send to you. It's on a slightly different tack. It's about metrics, and this is from Timothy, saying that cost saving is often the metric in finance departments, or that they require or relate to. And did any of your metrics show improved effectiveness, and rather than just cost saving? And what other metrics might you have used?
So, yeah, savings is definitely an intangible. It's kind of hard to quantify, and so what we do especially like with reutilization metrics, we know the cost of items when they're purchased, and so when we reutilize them, we can measure how much we save, because that meant the hospital didn't have to go buy another one. And then there was offshoots as well. We started to do a reupholstering program. I'm going to call it an offshoot of asset management. So furniture in a hospital it's very expensive because it's commercial grade. It's used a lot, and so. And because of the standards of a hospital, if there's just a tear in the fabric, it cannot be used anymore. It's an infection control violation. So there was a point when they would buy new exam tables, new lobby furniture every time there was a tear in the fabric. And so we looked into it and saw a cost savings by just reupholstering these things rather than buying new. And so we're saving like 60% on purchasing new. And we do track that. We track all the items that are going out for reupholstering, and so we can monetize that. Some things like employee satisfaction you can't monetize, but we know that it's happening because part of our monthly surveys, we ask those questions. Does the asset management department add value to what you're doing? So I agree, it's hard to quantify savings, but there's other ways to do it. If you think about it.
Okay, thanks, Art. Peter, your turn again. And this question's from Devon. Sharing your experience on how well the alignment of asset management value, or line of sight, as some people call it, worked between senior leadership and downstream fuel station owners and operators?
So yeah, I'd say that was an ongoing challenging piece with Caltex around getting that value and alignment right. You were seeing in the business there was many different opportunities or changes in that space, whether to franchise out petrol stations, to buy them back in, to mix them up with an investment outsource to an investment consortium and bring it back in. So that is an ongoing challenge on how they actually get that right alignment at the retail level in terms of who owns the actual retail sites. So, but what they do establish is their expected standards and brands at their retail sites. So their distribution of their basically fuel products and also convenience products is consistent. Yeah, I hope that answers that bit of line of sight. So yeah, you'll see that constantly, who actually owns the network of the assets and how it's all broken down.
Mm. Okay,
can I follow up? I'm sorry.
No,
I just wanted to
go ahead.
follow up on that last question. So part of our asset management system is we have a work order program, which helps in getting the metrics to leadership. So, for example, that's how we know where we're saving clinical staff time, is because through our work order system, we know which work orders are attributable to clinical areas and non-clinical areas. And so, and the time we spend in those areas. So we can differentiate between clinical and non-clinical areas. And that's how we're able to present those numbers as far as like saving clinical staff time.
Okay, cool, thanks. Okay, next question comes from Susan, and I'm not sure to whom it was addressed. She's asking how long did the journey that you've both talked about take? I suspect it was for Peter, but if you'd both just sort of indicate how long the journey has taken so far as that relates to the presentation you've given today. Peter?
Yeah, sure. I'd say the journey for Caltex was initiated in 2011. It was then kicked off in 2012. The first journey under Julian Segal concluded in about 2018, 2019. Upon then, Julian retired. That's done. Actually retired completely. Now he's enjoying golf and swimming and things like that. And now you've got Matt Halliday, who has taken on that culture and that adaptability mindset. And now they're going on to new ventures, as we talked about. That's where the initiatives of hydrogen, EV charging networks. Likewise, they've also set up environmental soils remediation, because at a petrol station site, once you've sold it, the soil is generally contaminated. They've actually set up a business, which is profitable, to remediate the soil on those sites. So yeah, that's what you're seeing now, is a different step in that journey, which is now capable to do because they've got this new mindset.
Okay, and Art?
Yeah, I would say that that the journey, it really continues because of it's a process of continual improvement. But to get to where we are today, I would say that it took probably about 4 years. And I would just tell the audience that it kind of depends on your environment. Me being in a county hospital, there's a lot of politics involved. So depending on how much freedom you have in an organization, and depending on the level of support you have, it should take anywhere between, I would say, 2 to 5 years.
Yep. Okay, cool. All right. So the next is from Jitesh Patel. And Jitesh first wants to say thank you to both of you for great presentations. He's then got a question for Peter. what do you think of having governance as value in your process, considering adaptability can easily make governance aspect reduce its credibility? In other words, the linkage between governance and adaptability, especially when beautifully transitioning from petroleum to energy business.
So I'd say that's an important part where my role was heavily connected with the corporate risk team, which was essentially governance. So what the role was more of a working governance model where, and it's actually basically makes sense, is that actually be fair and reasonable on what the organisational standards are and actually interpret and apply them as per what's acceptable. As around the EV journey, I can't really comment on how that's occurring now, but from where I was in that distribution fuels network area, it was a fit for purpose type governance model. It wasn't something which was trying to basically push people around a square peg for a round hole scenario. It was basically just do what's fair and reasonable, and so people have the awareness of the organisational management system and how to apply it, and that's how the approach of governance was there in the business.
Okay, thanks. Your turn now. And this one's from Paul Costanza. So when you completed the initial detailed asset management planning piece that would have showed you were required to invest, this is about metrics again, were any additional metrics placed on you to detail the value associated with the investments?
Can you repeat that?
Okay, so because of the money that was involved, I'm paraphrasing the question here now, did you have any additional metrics required of you associated with the investments than the ones you've already talked about?
No, not really. I mean, on an annual basis, when we go through our strategic asset management plan, it's with leadership, and so we kind of set our objectives at that point, and we continually, strive to meet them, and they're reported on a monthly basis. So it's very transparent on what we're trying to do, where we are in getting there. It's no secret.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, we've now got 2 minutes left of the official webinar time and quite a few more questions to come. So our plan at this point in time was to sort of continue with the questions, but sort of do a formal close of the event. So I'm going to ask Mike and Peter if they'd like to say a few words as part of the closing process.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Peter to share his screen and the last slide, which announces our next event.
I was going to do that, but okay.
Oh, okay.
Well, you can do that, Sally.
No, I think Heidi's now giving you control, so my option to do that's disappeared here.
Okay, and thankfully the technology now works. Thank you everyone for participating, and formally I'd like to, on behalf of the team here, fantastic work from both Peter and Art. Given the circumstances, I'm just wowed by those presentations. Thank you guys very much. If you guys have set the standard very high for following presentations, so we look forward to the next series, which logically leaves me to talk about the two things. One is the team that you see on the screen here. Thank you very much for the team. It's been an up and down exercise to get to this point, but I think all of us can applaud ourselves a little bit for the effort involved in putting this webinar together. Of course, this is the first of a series of webinars, and on the screen here you see some introductory material for webinar 2, which is going to take place in November the 9th and 10th, depending which part of the world you are, and you'll hear more information about that from the usual route through the AIM Council and the Asset Leadership Network about that webinar at that time in November.
And I too would like to thank the team, and yeah, Peter, I wasn't familiar with your presentation, but you really wowed me when I saw it. Art, thanks for the work that you're doing. Hopefully there's other hospital executives watching this and are encouraged to make improvements to their asset management system also. And there's been a consistent question about metrics. And so in the overtime, I think what they're saying is, what should we do to establish metrics that will help us in our asset management journey? So I know there's a bunch of other questions that Sally has, but in this overtime section that we're going into now, if Peter and Art could maybe relate some suggestions on the types of metrics people can set up, or there's too many different categories. What is the approach to establishing metrics that you would recommend to people starting their asset management journey? Peter, would you like to start?
I'd say if you look at the Caltex model, they had a very strong core around the leadership group, and they said this very key phrase all the time: know your numbers. And that's what they said, know your metrics. And for each terminal manager, that meant, what is the volume of product going through your terminal if you're in charge of it? Likewise, what is your CapEx and OpEx spend for that? And on that point there of those metrics, if your proposed CapEx spend can't actually demonstrate a outcome to the revenue or the volume of your terminal and also your OpEx spend, then that were the three key metrics. It was basically, what's your revenue, what's your CapEx, what's your OpEx, and that's what they pushed in with there. Obviously, they were the primary ones. Likewise, you got the other ones underneath, which is like the governance, the safety, and all those other pieces. They were just accepted that you do that. They were just normal, yeah. But they were the three ones which was line of sight every time.
So you're consulting with other organizations. What is your advice to them about knowing their numbers? Is it establishing what the numbers are that are important first, or?
For me, I'd say it's you're there to stay in business, if anything. So you've got to then look at how you're basically in asset management. We're talking more often than anything, it's your CapEx and OpEx spend, and is the CapEx and OpEx required going to actually, in a strategic sense, actually get the actual revenue and margin on profit? This because for a fuels industry, it's all about that margin and how we actually you're actually translating your asset strategy to a margin outcome.
I would think too, before Art answers, I mean, it's going to be different for every organisation what a suitable metric is. And you really need to look at your organisation's strategic plan and what its objectives are and its stakeholder requirements, and design the metrics that are appropriate, and in particular in line with the finance department.
Yeah, for this one was more around the business, which is a private venture. Now, if we go into government sector, trying to establish that sort of mindset is also different because there's different levers and drivers and stakeholder requirements where those sort of metrics don't necessarily fit in very neatly.
Art, do you have any suggestions?
What do you think, Art? Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Sally said it much better than I ever could have, but I would just add that, like the economist, I think Peter Drucker, said, you can't manage what you can't measure what you're not managing. So it's critical to know what you have to work with, and then you can't really gather that information unless you have all your processes in place. So once you have your processes in place, you have your inventory of the things you want to measure. Really, the sky's the limit. It's like peeling an onion. As soon as you find one, that leads to another one, and so yeah, it depends on the organization. It depends on that area you're looking to improve, but you have to know what it is you're working with to begin with, and your processes have to be solidified.
Sally?
Sally, turn yourself on, Sally.
Thanks for that. Peter Kohler, do you want to add any observations or ask any questions, or I'll just go to a couple of the remaining questions that we've got?
Please, Peter.
No. I actually think if we have time to go to some questions, other than to say my only comment is some of the lessons learned from Art were very good. That dot points and the last one about not being afraid to make a mistake. A key thing. But let's go to some more questions. I think, Sally. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
If there are some there, of course, I'm hoping there are. I can see the screen flashing at me.
There's quite a few, in fact.
How do you choose which one? Yeah.
So I've also checked who was still in the audience. So question from Julian Watts, and this is to Art. How do you link the line of sight between the assets and the direct health outcomes on patients? No, that's a good one.
Yeah. The main thing is saving the clinical staff time to focus on the patients. I would say that's the main thing, so that they don't need to worry about anything in terms of the personal property around them. They don't have to wonder who they need to call. They can just focus on the patient. And so I would say that's the direct line of sight.
Okay, great. Thanks. So this one is from Jack Kelly. And he says it's an observation that these two case studies show how asset management can be initiated as a top-down effort in Caltex or a bottom-up effort as in university health. A point that each of Peter and Art might like to comment on is that implementing asset management per ISO 55001 is the starting point for further improvements, especially in organisational culture and performance, as well as monetary benefits. And do you feel comfortable or like to add any comment to those?
Yeah, I think that's quite a valid comment, is that are you trying to think as ISO 55000 is reaching the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro? Or are you thinking your Asset 55000 journey is reaching the base camp of Mount Everest, both at the same height? So how I would see is it actually gets you to the actual base camp. 55,000 actually gets you to the place where you actually can make effective decision making and strategic decisions, etc. That's probably my real snapshot of it.
I love that. I did not know that fact. Thank you.
It's about that. If I'm wrong, tell me.
And I liked that's a good question, and I liked the fact that it helped at University Health to break down some of those silos that almost every organization has between departments, because it's a common goal. And so, like I said in my presentation, when it comes to certifications, nobody wants to be that person that is the cause of the certification not going through. So I've noticed just in the time that I've been here, just the level of communication between departments has improved dramatically. Again, because nobody wants to be that person to have that certification denied.
Okay, cool.
I think it's also good to note that both organizations continued to improve. Art's first certification was just the beginning, and then there was another certification, and he hasn't mentioned it, but he's teaching both the IT department and facilities asset management department about ISO 55000. And Peter pointed out the new products and just the whole change in the direction of the organization, which I'm sure is going to continue to move deeper into being energy as opposed to just oil.
Cool. Okay. So only a few more questions. So the next one is from Lalit, and it's for Peter. And and sort of asking, was it a bottom-up approach? Would you describe it as a bottom-up approach that anyone could meet with the CEO for a chat? Or is it?
I think he initiated it because the CEO was a very philosophical person. He liked to read a lot of philosophy, so he had a genuine interest in people and how they think. So hence why he made that available, because he knows probably from life experience that if he gets these different people's ideas and thoughts, it actually makes him better as a person as well. That's probably where him as a person in his own makeup, that's why he would go about that in that way. But however, the values of the business, which I talked about, were actually employee derived, and that meant that when the values were expected, the employees had already contributed to what they were to be applied. So it developed that cooperation and that back and forth from line of sight occurring.
Yep, cool, thanks. Okay, next question for Art from Shane Day. And wanting to know that whether the business, Universal Health, has changed since the initial ISO certification.
Interesting.
And how you've adapted. And sorry, there are two parts to this. And has working within the finance arm provided an increased understanding and ownership of the whole of life costs and decision making?
Yes. Well, change, is a constant. I mean, look, the pandemic we just went through and had to adapt to people working from home and things of that. So, yeah, we've been able to easily adapt because of our processes are just so solid, and we're very proactive too in our approach. So, when we see an opportunity for improvement, we attack it and try to make things better constantly. But like I said before, the culture of communication is much better than it used to be. So I would say, there's a all around improvement because of the standards we put in place.
And I'd like to say that Art is not only a senior fellow in the Asset Leadership Network, but University Health is a member of the Asset Leadership Network. And Art allowed us to have a demonstration project of how to virtually set up a temporary hospital in their parking lot. And just by his involvement in using the very, real facility, space, potential needs, he was able to help not only his own organization learn about new ways of using information technology and virtual asset management to help the real world and help all the people who observed it. And it is a recording that's available on the ALN website.
And let me just add too, because the question from Shane included the department falling under finance, and I think that helped a lot because let's face it, it's good to be close to the people that manage the money, and so I think falling under finance was a huge benefit and moving away from materials management. Yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks. Almost down to the last couple of questions. Will the presentation be available? Paul had asked that one. I assume it will be at some point, and we'll let people know post the event.
Indeed so, yes.
Yep, okay,
Yes.
cool. Yeah. Yep. All right, and then from Nitin, thank you very much to all of us for the presentations. And he and Arvind had a similar question. And I'm going to put those two together, and it sort of circles back to the first questions. So one important thing that stood out during these presentations is the consistent and undeterred support of leadership for the improvements. In other words, top leadership or top management support for the process. And so a comment on that one. but also then an associated question from Arvind. How can an organisation improve their asset management systems in achieving their asset management objectives if the relevant stakeholders are not on board? So that's the antithesis, where they're not getting support, and therefore there's no understanding within the stakeholders of the value and benefits of the asset management journey and ISO implementation. I think everyone might like to comment on that one. Peter Kohler, why don't we start with you for a change?
Oh, thank you very much. No, I was I was sitting here reflecting. Some years ago, the Asset Management Council had an excellence award process that documented a lot of things, and we distilled out from all the recipients over the years, or some of the key points of what led to organisations being quite successful. And what you heard today, actually, when I was reflecting, sitting here thinking about those years by when all that information was recorded and sieved and analysed, and hearing the presentations, there were some similar themes. And one of the themes is management support, of course, particularly top management support. The other one is clarity, clarity of outcomes, clarity of purpose, and of course engagement of the people doing the work. Or doing all the activities. So I think there's in terms of the way, those recurring themes to me are really quite important. That's the whole point of these presentations as well, the collective presentations, not just our two excellent speakers today, but to distill the achievements down into and look at what are the key things needed to be successful implementing. And so that's my sort of considered thoughts about it all. I don't know whether Peter and Art, you might want to comment on that.
I think with Fuels and the roles and the organisation there was a sense of responsibility and ownership of the actual assets where you're working with, and the sense of realising the consequences of poor decision making or not taking that ownership. There was an event where it would only be a site which may only take 8 or 10% of the total volume for the entire operations, but if that site had in an instant there had developed any further, that site being unavailable would actually put the entire organisation at risk. So yeah, it's taking ownership in that piece. If you really want change, you've got to have that ownership culture.
It also sounds like a bit like survivalist, isn't it? I mean, if we want to be around, we've got to do something.
Yeah. People actually wanted to actually work there. So if you want to work there, take ownership.
Okay, Art, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so senior leadership support is just critical in overcoming the obstacles that are inevitable. But the beauty about the ISO standard is you kind of get to set your own scope limitations. And so if you don't have support, I always say you can't worry about things that are out of your control. But there's a lot of things that are in your control, and you can set your scope within those limits and then continue that way, achieve that success, and then reapproach senior leadership and say, hey, basically, this is what we did on our own. We could do a lot more with your help.
Yeah, and that's a really good way of looking at it. I was involved in facility management where we had multiple contracts and the scope was to a particular site. And then we wanted to increase the scope to an additional site. So you can also then graduate the level of engagement of this as Art says, by scope management, increase it as the appetite's there and the sense of value is identified.
Great, thanks for that. And Mike, I was actually going to pass to you to give your thoughts and close us out.
Okay, so I think that's a great question about what do you do if stakeholders aren't involved, and that is part of the human condition. I don't want to change. This is how I've been doing things, and leave me alone. Being involved in the Asset Leadership Network, I've been able to observe over and over that many successful asset management approaches come from the financial office. And they say, if you don't do things this way, you won't get your money. And then suddenly there's stakeholder involvement. Admiral Allen said to his engineering department, if you can't improve how you deliver services, then I will fire all 600 of you and I will outsource this to any organization in the world that can help me achieve my mission. And then suddenly people were interested in asset management. So, I'm lucky enough to be able to provide examples. The direct question to that is hit them with the money. Then to close it out, I don't want to. This is going so well, but I'll just have to say thanks to the audience. So many of you are still here and interested in this topic that obviously we all are passionate about. So thank you for your attendance. Please tell people that we'll be having another event. Thank you, Peter Robinson. Thank you, Art Kurland and Peter Kohler and Sally Nugent. Like I said, it's been a pleasure and an education working with you. I look forward to our next event.
Goodbye, everyone. See you next time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.